The 22nd of February 1925, Volume 17. How God, in creating man, formed many paths in order to facilitate his entry into his will and therefore into the Celestial Fatherland. I was thinking about the holy divine will and praying to my adorable Jesus that by his goodness he would give me the grace to fulfill his most holy will in everything. And I said, you who love and want that your will be done, help me, assist me, and feed me your will in every instant, so that nothing else may have life in me. Now, while I was praying, my sweet Jesus moved in my interior and, squeezing me tightly to himself, told me, my daughter, how my heart is wounded by the prayer of one who seeks only my will. I hear the echo of my prayer, which I did when I was upon earth. All my prayers were reduced to one single point, that the will of my Father be perfectly fulfilled, both upon me and upon all creatures. This was the greatest honour for me and for the Celestial Father, to do his most holy will in everything. By doing the will of the Eternal One, always and in everything, my humanity opened the ways between the human will and the divine, which had been closed by the creature through sin. You must know that in creating man, the divinity formed many channels of communication between the creator and the creature. The three powers of the soul were channels: the intelligence, a channel in order to comprehend my will; the memory, a channel in order to remember it continuously; and the will in the middle of these two channels formed the third channel in order to fly into the will of her creator. The intelligence and the memory were to the support, the defence, the strength of the channel of the will, that it might not stagger either to the right or to the left. Channel was the eye, that she might look at the beauties and the riches contained in my will. Channel the hearing, that she might hear the calls, the harmonies contained in it. Channel the word, in which she might receive the continuous outpouring of my word fiat, and the good which my fiat contains. Channel the hands, so that man, in raising them while working, might reach, in my will, the purpose of unifying his works with the works of his Creator. Channel the feet, to follow the steps of my will. Channel the heart, the desires, the affections, to be filled with the love of my will, and to rest in it. See then how many channels there are in the creature in order to come into my will if she wanted to. All channels were open between God and man, and by virtue of our will all our goods were his, and this with justice, because he was our son, our image, a work which came from our hands, and from the ardent breath of our womb. But the human will, rebellious, did not want to enjoy the rights of the goods we gave it. Not wanting to do our will, man did his own, and by doing his own he put bars and gates through these channels. He constrained himself within the miserable circle of his will. He lost ours and went wandering in the exile of his passions, of his weaknesses, under a tenebrous sky, loaded with thunders and with storms. Poor child, in the midst of so many evils wanted by himself. Therefore every act of human will is a bar that he places before mine. It is a gate he forms to prevent the union of our wills, and the communication of goods between heaven and earth is interrupted. Compassionating and loving man with infinite love, my humanity, by doing the will of my Father in everything, kept these channels whole and impetrated the removal of the bars and the destruction of the gates which the human will had formed, and so it opened the channels again for whomever wants to come into my will, to give back to him those rights which we gave man when we created him. Paths are necessary in order to facilitate the journey, They are the means in order for man to be able to make very often a little visit to his own celestial fatherland. And knowing how beautiful his fatherland is, and how happy one can live in it, to love it, and to yearn to take possession of it, and therefore to live detached from the exile of down here. These channels in the creature are necessary so that very often she may rise to her true fatherland. She may know it and love it. And if the soul loves her celestial fatherland, if placing herself on the way within our will, she makes her little visits, this is a sign that the soul is walking along these paths. This is a sign for you. Don't you remember how many times you took the way to heaven and penetrated into the celestial regions? And as you made your little visit, soon my will made you descend into the exile. And since you loved the fatherland, the exile seemed ugly and almost unbearable to you. This love for the fatherland, the bitterness you felt in living in exile, was a good sign for you that the fatherland is yours. See, it happens this way also with the low things of this world. If one has a large possession, he forms a path in order to go visit it very often, to enjoy it, to take the goods which are in it, and while visiting it, he loves it and keeps it in his heart. On the other hand, if he does not form a path, he never visits this possession, because without a path it is almost impenetrable, nor does he think of it or ever speak of it. This is a sign that he does not love it, and that he despises his own goods. And even though he could be rich, because of his bad will, he is a poor one, who lives in the most squalid misery. And so here is my wisdom in creating man. I wanted to form the paths between me and him, to make sanctity easier for him, as well as the communication of our goods and his entrance into the celestial fatherland. End of the reading. The 22nd of February 1929. How when she writes, the divine will makes itself actor, prompter and spectator, ordinary and extraordinary order that the divinity has in the creation. While being in the highest bitterness of the privation of my sweet Jesus, I was writing what is written above, and although I was doing it with incredible effort, given the state I was in, yet I wanted to do it, to give as though the last attestation of homage to that fear that, with so much love, had manifested itself to me. And now, though it is so brief in his speaking, I do not want the tiny little drops of light that it manifests to me to be lost. Who knows, I was thinking to myself, whether this might not be the last drop of light that I put on paper. But while I was thinking this, my beloved Jesus came out from within my interior, and throwing his arms around my neck, he clasped me so very tightly in his arms and told me, "My daughter, as soon as you began to write, I felt myself drawn so strongly that I could not resist, in such a way that as my fear overflowed from you, it put me out in order to direct while you write what I have manifested to you about my divine volition. This is a commitment. It is a sacred and divine right that it has, to be the actor, the prompter, and the spectator while you write, so that everything may be light and surprising truths, in a way that the divine characters of my will may be known in clear notes. Do you think that you are the one who writes? No, no. You are nothing other than the superficial part. The substance, the primary part, the prompter, is my divine will. And if you could see the tenderness, the love, the yearnings with which my fiat inscribes its life on these papers, you would die consumed with love. Having said this, he withdrew into my interior, and I, as though coming round from the enchantment of Jesus, continued to write. But I felt myself all light, being whispered everything, being fed the words. I am unable to say what I experienced while writing. Then after I finished writing, I began to pray, but with the nail in my heart of who knows when Jesus would come back again. And I was lamenting, why is he not taking me to heaven still? And I remembered the many times in which he had reduced me to be at death's door, as if I were about to cross the doors of heaven, but as they were about to open in order to receive me into the blessed dwelling, obedience had imposed itself over my poor existence, and as it would make the doors close to me, I would be forced again to remain in the hard exile of life. Oh, though holy, how cruel and almost tyrannical is blessed obedience in certain circumstances. And still I thought to myself, I would like to know whether it was because of obedience or the final point of my existence down here had not yet come. But while I was thinking about this and many other things wandered through my mind with such unspeakable bitterness that it seemed it was intoxicating me, my highest good Jesus, my dear life, surprised me, and making himself seen again, told me, my daughter, you must know that in our divinity there is the ordinary order for the whole creation. And this is not moved because of any incident, not one point, not 1 minute earlier, not 1 minute later. Life ends when it is established by us. We are immutable in this regard. But in us, there is also the extraordinary order. And since we are the masters of the laws of the whole creation, we have the right to change them whenever we want. But if we change them, a great glory of ours must enter into this, and a great good for the whole creation. We do not change our laws because of little things. Now, my daughter, you know that the greatest work is to establish the kingdom of my divine will upon earth and to make it known. There is no good that the creature can receive if she does not know it. What is your wonder then if we have surrendered to obedience so as not to let you die? More so since, because of your connection with my divine fiat, you enter into the extraordinary order. And since each knowledge about my divine volition is many lives that have come out of our womb, the sacrifice of your life was needed in order to receive them, and the very privation of heaven from which obedience snatched you. In addition to this, since my divine will, its knowledges, its reigning, are not only the greatest good for the earth, but the complete glory for the whole of heaven, all of heaven prayed me to surrender to the pleas of the one who commanded you. And I, out of regard for my will, while opening the doors to you, surrendered to their pleas. Do you think that I do not know your great sacrifice, your continuous martyrdom of being away from the Celestial Fatherland, and only to fulfill my will in the one through whom it was commanded to you? Indeed, this sacrifice has snatched from me the many lives of the knowledges of my fiat. And then a soul was needed who would know heaven and how our divine will is done in the celestial dwelling, in order to be able to entrust to her its secrets, its story, its life, and by appreciating them, she would make them her own life and would be ready to lay down her life so that others might know a good so great. Jesus kept silent, and I, feeling his suffering, was lamenting and reproaching Jesus, for he would not take me to heaven. And he, courage, my daughter. There is just about a little left for the writings on my divine fiat. My very silence says that I am about to complete the great manifestations of the gospel of the kingdom of my divine will. So I did in the kingdom of redemption. During the last days of my life, I did not add anything else. On the contrary, I hid myself, and if I said anything, it was a repetition in order to confirm what I had already said, because what I had said was sufficient so that all might receive the goods of being redeemed. It was up to them to take advantage of it. So it will be for the kingdom of my divine will. Since once I have said everything, in such a way that nothing may be lacking, in order to be able to receive the good of knowing it and to be able to possess all of its goods, then I will have no more interest in keeping you on earth. It will be up to them to take advantage of it. End of the reading. February 22nd, 1930, Volume 28. One who lives in the divine will remains surrounded by the divine immutability. Death of good, sacrifice of life in order to make it rise again. I am always prey to that divine fiat that knows how to conquer sweetly and strongly. With its sweetness it draws me in an irresistible way. With its strength it wins me in such a way that it can do with me whatever it wants. O holy will, since you conquer me, oh please let it be so that, with your own strength and sweetness, I may win you, and surrendering to my continuous supplications, come to reign upon earth. Form your sweet enchantment to the human will, and let everything on earth become divine will. So, while I was thinking about the divine volition, my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, making himself seen, told me, my daughter, if you knew what it means to give oneself prey to my divine will, the soul remains surrounded by our immutability and everything becomes immutable for her. Sanctity, light, grace, love. So she no longer feels the variability of the human ways, but the stability of the divine ways. Therefore, one who lives in my divine will can be called heavens, that are always fixed and stable at their place of honour with all their stars. And if they revolve, since it is the whole of creation that revolves, they do not change place, nor do they mutate, but the heavens remain always immutable with all the stars. Such is the soul who lives in my divine will. She may go around, do various actions, but since she goes around within the motive power of my divine fiat and in the wholeness of my will, she will always be heaven's and immutable in her goods and in the prerogatives with which my supreme will has endowed her. On the other hand, one who lives outside of my divine fiat, without its motive power, can be called like those wandering stars that fall in the space as if there were no fixed place for them, and they are forced, like wandering stars, to run headlong, as if they were lost away from the vault of the heavens. Such is the soul who does not do and does not live in my divine will. She mutates at each occasion. She feels within herself such variability of mutation that she feels boredom in repeating a continuous good, and if she makes any sparkling of light come out of herself, it is the glittering of the wandering stars that soon disappears. It can be said that this is the sign to know whether one lives of divine will, immutability in good, and changing at every little blow if one lives of human will. After this, I followed the acts of the divine fiat, going around in the works of creation, in Eden, in the most notable points and people of the history of the world, to ask in the name of all for the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. And my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, by withdrawing from my divine will, man gave death to the goods that my divine volition would have made rise in him had it not been rejected. And as he went out, so died the continuous act of the divine life in man, died the sanctity that always grows, the light that always arises, the beauty that never stops, always to embellish, the untiring love that never says enough, that always, always wants to give. More so, since by his rejecting my divine will died the order, the air, the food that was to nourish him continuously. See then how many divine goods man caused to die within himself by withdrawing from my divine will. Now, wherever there has been the death of good, the sacrifice of life is required in order to make the destroyed good rise again. This is why, justly and wisely, whenever I wanted to renew the world and to give a good to creatures, I have requested the sacrifice of life, as I asked of Abraham the sacrifice of sacrificing to me his only son, as indeed he carried out, and, prevented by me, he stopped. And in that sacrifice that cost Abraham more than his own life, the new generation rose again, in which the divine liberator and redeemer was to descend, who was to make the good that had died in the creature rise again. With the passing of time, I allowed the sacrifice and the great sorrow of Jacob for the death of his beloved son, Joseph. And even though he did not die, it was for him as if he had died in reality. This was the new call that made the celestial liberator rise again in that sacrifice, whom it called to make the lost good rise again. Furthermore, I myself, by coming upon earth, wanted to die, but with the sacrifice of my death, I called for the rising again of many lives and of the good that the creature had caused to die. And I wanted to rise again in order to confirm the life for that good and the resurrection for the human family. What great crime it is to make good die, so much so that the sacrifice of other lives is required in order to make it rise again. Now, with all my redemption and the sacrifice of my death, since my divine will does not reign, not all good has risen again in the creature. My will is repressed and cannot carry out the sanctity it wants. Good suffers with intermittency. Now it rises, now it dies. And my fiat remains with the continuous sorrow of not being able to make rise all the good it wants in the creature. And this is why I remained in the little host and sacrament. I departed for heaven, but I remained on earth in the midst of creatures, to be born, live, and die, though mystically, in order to make rise in them all the good that man rejected by withdrawing from my divine will. And united to my sacrifice, I ask for the sacrifice of your life, to make its kingdom rise again in the midst of the human generations. And from each tabernacle I am as though on the lookout to accomplish the complete work, redemption and fiat voluntas tuae on earth as it is in heaven. Content with sacrificing myself and dying in each host, in order to make the Son of my divine fiat, the new era and its full triumph, rise again. Upon departing from the earth, I said, I go to heaven and I remain on earth in the sacrament. I will content myself with waiting for centuries. I know it will cost me much. Unheard of outrages will not be lacking, maybe more than in my very passion. But I will arm myself with divine patience, and from the little host I will accomplish the complete work. I will make my will reign in the hearts, and will continue to remain in their midst to enjoy the fruits of so many sacrifices I have been through. Therefore, together with me, be united to the sacrifice for a cause so holy, and for the just triumph that my will may reign and dominate. End of the reading. There are no more readings today.